Hey everyone, it's Chris. I hope you are enjoying your summer 2024. I know I am, and Jace is as well. It's been a while since you've heard from us. Unfortunately, both of us have had a busy start to our June and July. I moved and started a new job. I know Jace is busy with work and travel as well. So we haven't put out as much postseason content as we had originally anticipated. For that, we apologize, and we are also releasing 2 episodes as a joint episode that we recorded back in May of this year. This episode contains team-by-team recaps from the 2023-2024 Premier League season, as well as our price predictions for the upcoming year, with the official FPL account starting to release player prices this week and weekend. We thought it was important to get this one out so as to not look like we waited for official FPL to release prices before making our predictions. So we probably have some bad takes in here, but just listening back, I think most of them were pretty good. So sit back, relax, enjoy this team-by-team breakdown of the 2023-2024 Fantasy Premier League season, and we will be back soon with 2024-2025 preseason content. Hello and welcome to Free Hit, an FPL podcast. I'm Chris, joined as always by my co-host Jace. This week, as part of our postseason coverage, we are doing team-by-team recaps of everyone that is currently in the Premier League, so excluding Luton Town, Burnley, and Sheffield United, sadly. But for each team, we're going to go through, talk a little bit about the overall team performance, as well as some players that stuck out to us. And anybody that's on our radar for next season. So we will start with Arsenal alphabetically. Overall, Arsenal had 89 points last season, which was second in the league. They had 68.5 non-penalty expected goals, which was fourth in the league, and 25.7 non-penalty expected goals allowed, which was first in the league, for an overall non-penalty expected goal differential of 42.8, which was also first in the league. The top scoring defender for Arsenal was Ben White with 182 points. The top scoring midfielder for Arsenal was Bukayo Saka with 226 points. And you have to go pretty far down the list, but the top scoring forward for Arsenal this season was Gabriel Jesus with 85 points. So with all that being said about Arsenal, Jace, are they a team that you are buying or selling going into next season?
Yeah, you're buying Arsenal, right? I think with those stats, that's really hard to argue with. I think, like we discussed last episode, the question is which defender I want to buy here and which midfielder, right? Because I think you're going to see a lot of people torn between Saka and Havertz, plus, insert any potential transfer in there that you're going to see. And then, obviously, you've had the stalwarts of Gabriel and Saliba at the center back position. And, of course, Ben White, highest scoring defender. So which one do you go with? Like we said last week, I'm going to go with the one that's nailed, that's most nailed, that I know is going to start, which I think is going to be Saliba at the beginning. And I think midfield-wise, Havertz is who I'm buying to start. His form was incredible. And as long as he keeps playing in that position, that role that Arteta's had him in kind of towards the end of the season, I want to own him, and I want to own him as long as I can. So those are who I'm buying from Arsenal. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I suppose if you had to select today the ideal Arsenal triple up, I think based on this season, it's obviously a defender, Saka, and then Havertz, right? The hard thing is that Havertz is likely going to change positions from midfield to forward in FPL, and the defender prices are likely to go up. So for me, I'm thinking about who are the Arsenal guys going into next season that might not see as much of a price rise. A couple names that come to mind are Trossard, who seemed to overtake Martinelli on the wing towards the end of last season. I think he could be 7.58 somewhere in there as opposed to a 9 plus, like I expect Saka, Havertz, potentially Odegaard to be as well. The other guy I'm interested in coming back is Timber. Defensively, I thought he looked the strongest out of the Arsenal defense during the first game and some of the preseason last year. Of course, he got hurt, which again, I think means maybe his price is a little bit lower going into this year. But yeah, it's going to be hard for me to stay away from Kai Havertz and Bukayo Saka in the team. And I think a lot of people will be on an Arsenal triple up next season.
Yeah, and I think pricing wise, the FPL game is usually pretty fair in that they're not going to have, 10 midfielders that are all 10 million plus, right? I think they're usually pretty level headed there. But what kind of price do you think Havertz is gonna take next year? We're saying 7.6 is what he's ending on. So you thinking 8.5, 9 area? Is that too much?
I think Kai Havertz will be an 8.5 million forward. I think Bukayo Saka will be a 10 million midfielder. And I think Ben White has a chance to be 6.5 to 7, whereas I expect Gabriel and Saliba to both be around 6 million. How about you?
Okay, interesting. No, I thought Gabrielle and Saliba, there'll definitely be a price difference between the two, right? They're not going to be the same price, I'd imagine. They didn't do
I
it
could
last season.
I could see them being the same, frankly. I think the question was around Gabriel's minutes at the beginning of the season. He seems to have proved that out. We'll see if Arsenal sign anyone else at center back.
Who loses out on the spot if Timber comes in to the back line?
I was thinking that it would be the left back, so the sort of the Zinchenko Tomiyasu
Yeah,
type role. It's going to be really hard to take Ben White out of that team after the season
sure.
that he had, and same with the two center backs. But we could see more rotation along the back line as well.
Yeah, Timber's a good shout, I think, as far as value goes. 'Cause like you said, he's probably not going to get much of a price difference, maybe a decrease, if anything, since he had virtually no meaningful returns. So that could be where you could look to maintain kind of their defensive form while not breaking the bank. But like you mentioned, rotation is big there, and that's why I think Trossard is a weird pick as well, someone to look at, because you just do kind of worry about the minutes, because I don't know that Trossard's a better all-around player than Martinelli, but towards the end of the season, it seemed like he did score every time he touched the pitch. So
Yeah, certainly more of the form winger for
hard
Arsenal
to
there as well.
argue with that, but at the end of the day, I mean, who knows? He still finished with 138 points total, which is pretty good, right? So it's Trossard. So I guess we'll wait and see. I don't know that I go with him right off the bat, though. I think I want to see some consistency first before I make
Yeah.
that move. But post wild card could be post first wild card could be a good option.
Let's move on to the next team, Aston Villa. Overall, this season they had 68 points, which was fourth in the league, good for the last Champions League berth from the Premier League. They had 60 non-penalty expected goals, which was seventh in the league, and 58 non-penalty goals allowed, which was 13th. Non-penalty expected goals allowed, I should say, which was 13th in the league. Overall, their non-penalty expected goal difference was only 2.1, which was eighth in the league, a little bit lower than their finish of fourth. In terms of FPL assets, the top scorer and top scoring forward for Aston Villa was Ollie Watkins with 228 points. The top scoring midfielder for Aston Villa was Leon Bailey with 148 points, actually tied with Doug Luiz as well on 148 points. And the top scoring defender for Aston Villa was actually the goalkeeper, Emi Martinez, with 115 points. Buy or sell Aston Villa assets next year?
Bye.
Really? Okay, even
Yeah.
with the difference between the top four finish in the league versus the kind of eighth overall.
Yeah, because I'm
finish
not
in
going to
non-penalty numbers.
I'm not going to their defense. I'm going to the attackers. I think Ollie Watkins, I think, is just phenomenal player. We talked ad nauseum about him on the last episode. So as long as, again, Watkins isn't like 10, 5, 11 million, he's going to be my second striker next season. Like I said, as long as I can afford him. So I'm buying Watkins at least. Martinez may not be a bad shout for a keeper, as you mentioned. I know they did concede a lot of goals, but surely that's something they look to shore up next season. The only thing to consider is Champions League football, right? They were in the Conference League this year, but it didn't seem to matter. Granted, it was the Conference League and all that stuff, but it seemed like Watkins and the lot still played a good amount of minutes in both competitions. So that's where I'm at. Watkins is kind of the only person I'm considering, but who knows what's going to happen if they sign Ross Barkley. As the rumor mills are saying, you know how high on Barkley I am.
Yeah, Watkins might be the outlier here. I'm not sure that I look at Villa and I see a team that's likely to finish top 4 next season. And I know that FPL tends to price players based on where the team finishes in the previous season. So Leon Bailey has kind of been this, 2 seasons ago, he was the sort of consensus budget midfielder, never really game good. Last year, he was not necessarily a consensus budget midfielder, but a budget midfielder, and really had kind of a breakout season. He overtook Diaby, it seemed like, in terms of who was in the squad. Now, I think we've missed some of the value on the Aston Villa midfielders. I wasn't overly impressed with the defense. So for me, I think it might be a Watkins or bust situation next year. Any price predictions for Aston Villa next year?
No, I think Watkins is going to be the one everyone's looking at, and he's in it at 8.9. I totally see a world where he starts at 9.5. I don't know that he's going to go to 10. That just seems like a pretty big leap. But who knows what could happen? What do you think he's going to get double digits or?
I think he will be 10. I'm not sure how to compare him with Kai Havertz. I think given that he's a little bit more nailed, whereas sometimes Havertz has played in midfield, I could see Watkins being a little bit more expensive. And at that point, I almost prefer Havertz to Watkins in the forwards.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our next team. Bournemouth had a surprisingly pretty good season this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Overall, 48 points, which was good for 11th. However, their non-penalty expected goals was 53.6, which was good for 9th in the league. Their non-penalty expected goals allowed was 52.5, which was good for 8th in the league, which resulted in a non-penalty expected goal differential of 1.1, which was good for 11th overall in the league. Their top scorers, Dom Solanke was the top scoring forward with 175 points. Neto was actually the top scoring defender for Bournemouth with 110 points. And you have to go down to Justin Kluivert at 100 points to find their top scoring midfield assets. Are you buying or selling Bournemouth next season?
Selling. I think we've seen a lot of clubs in kind of the Bournemouth bracket where they do a really good job one season and it's really tough for them to maintain form going into the next. I think it really just depends on what kind of help Gary O'Neill gets at the club level, what kind of firepower he gets in through the transfer window. But
Areola. I keep saying Areola like he's the West Ham goalkeeper. He's not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the manager was one of the main reasons for the improvement this season. So it'll be interesting to see kind of who they bring in that might suit his style.
Yeah. And, I listen, Solanke is a good pick, but if he ends up at 7.5, 8, right? Something like that, he's probably less attractive than he was when he started the season at 6.5? Was that where his opening price was?
6, I think, if I remember correctly.
So, it's tough for me to back a Solanke at that price. I think there's probably going to be better options, but we'll see. I mean, surely you're not buying Bournemouth either, right?
I think I am a buy on Bournemouth. I actually believe the improvement. I think they've solidified themselves as one of the best teams in the Premier League, like a solidly mid-table Premier League club, one of the best teams in the league that's not going to Europe. is what I was going to say. So we talked about like Newcastle, right? Just missing out on Europe. That makes their FPL assets more attractive this year.
Right.
I think you could say the same for Bournemouth. Again, I think underlying numbers were really solid. Solanke is a guy who has always been good from an underlying numbers standpoint, and this was really the first season that he's actually hit the expected goal numbers that he's been putting up. So I buy kind of the improvement from him. What I would really like to see from Bournemouth is either a midfield or defensive asset emerge. You know, Clivert was a guy 4.5 mid that a lot of folks were talking about at the beginning of the season. Never really materialized. We had Semenyo, that was classified as a forward this season. It'll be interesting to see if he gets classified as a midfielder. If he does, he could be a good budget asset. We also have Tavernier in the midfield as well, who again was 5.0, never really materialized. So I think there maybe is some value in if one of their attacking midfielders comes good or a defensive asset for next season.
I'm going to challenge you a bit there because they finished 12th, right, in the league. So you're saying that of the 11 teams ahead of them, there aren't 15 assets there that you'd rather have over a Bournemouth asset.
I think that's a good point. I guess that I am still expecting the price points of the Bournemouth assets to be much lower. So if we're taking out kind of the big six, we're taking out the Champions League level teams.
Sure.
Which teams do I think are in the ascendancy next season? I could see Bournemouth finishing 8th, right? I could easily see them as a top half team, but with assets mostly under 6 million, I think would be what I would be looking for.
I guess if I'm looking at Bournemouth's bracket, I see Crystal Palace have finished 10th, and we already know. I think those assets are attractive if they stay, right? And then right below Bournemouth, you got Fulham, who has traditionally been pretty good at good value assets. Your Munizes, your Anthony Robinsons, players like that. And then you've got Wolves and Everton below them, and we've already saw Everton had the best goalkeeper in the game, right? So I'm trying to look. I think what Gary O'Neill, who's at Wolves, not Bournemouth, right? I like his project better than I like Bournemouth. I like their trajectory a bit better, especially if they can stay healthy. So to me, I'm just not sold on the Bournemouth being where I'm going to go for those value players. I think I'm still going to look elsewhere. But like you said, if they sign someone that's exciting in the midfield, or like Semenyo gets reclassified as a midfielder, maybe I do look there, because I really did like Semenyo a lot this season too. It just, there's no room for him in the front three, right?
Right.
So.
Any price predictions? I think for Bournemouth, really, we're looking at Solanke next season. I agree with 7 million. Seems about
you
right.
Think 7? Yeah. Yeah, that's probably where I'll land. And he's at 6.9. That's where he ended the season, right? So it makes sense for them to round up to 7 and call it.
Right. Let's move on to our next team, which is Brighton, who finished 11th. Yeah, Bournemouth finished, I think I mentioned 11th earlier. They were tied with Brighton on points, but Bournemouth technically were 12th on goal differential. So Brighton finished 11th overall this season with 48 points. They had 52.2 non-penalty expected goals, which was good for 10th. They allowed 50.7 non-penalty expected goals, which was good for 7th overall, resulting in a non-penalty expected goal differential, that is really a mouthful, of 1.5, which put them 10th overall, almost exactly mid-table of the clubs that are in the Premier League. Buy or sell Brighton next season?
Really just depends on their coach. I think they didn't really show me anything at the end of this season, right? Because our guy was he had 1 foot out the door anyways, so I don't know that they were really trying, but at the same time they had a lot of injuries. So that being said, if Matoma is still at Brighton, he's still probably going to be a good default for a value midfielder if the price point makes sense, right? So I'm selling Brighton right now. I'm not high on him.
Pascal Gross was the top scoring midfielder for Brighton with 153 points. João Pedro was the top scoring forward for Brighton at 104 points, one of the most popular budget forwards going into the season. And Lewis Dunk was the highest scoring Brighton defender with 89 points overall. But I agree. I think this is more about a season for Brighton about who was not out there. And if we get a new manager that plays a consistent 11 that FPL managers can rely on, I think that's really going to be the difference next season. So
and if you
for
get
me,
your players back, right? Like your Stupignans, like we talked about, your Matomas, the value players that you can count on. I don't think either of them had a great season, especially with injuries. So surely they're not going to get priced up at this point, right?
Yeah, agree. I think they're a great buy low team for next season. Next, let's talk about Brentford, who finished on 39 points, which was good for 16th in the league. They had 56 non-penalty expected goals, which was good for 8th, and 54.4 non-penalty expected goals allowed, which was good for 10th, which overall led to a non-penalty expected goal differential of 1.6, which was good for 9th in the league. Their top scoring player was Wissa with 131 points. Second was Mbeumo with 127 points, despite not playing a lot of games this season. And third was Flecken, the goalkeeper, with 119 points. Are you buying or selling Brentford returning to form next season?
If those two are the main guys again, I could totally see buying Brentford for a budget striker. But I'm not really sure. I don't think Tony stays, right? Granted, the form wasn't there towards the end of the season, but I still think he moves on. They're going to cash in on him. And beyond that, Reguilon was just on loan. Whether they make that move permanent or not, who can say, right? I don't know if Levy will take a low number for Reguilon or if they'll try and move him elsewhere. So I'm surprised. I guess he was only there half the season, so that's why he wasn't the highest scoring defender. But if Reguilon's there again in a similar role at a similar price, I could totally see going to him. But I'm just not seeing it there, especially if the manager doesn't stay and he moves on. He's been tied with some bigger clubs across Europe and in the domestic league. So I don't know. I'm probably selling. But what do you think, Chris?
I think as a team with this significant XG underperformance and really bad injury luck this season, especially with Mbeumo and Tony for his suspension plus some injury luck, I think that they're a buy next season. I'm really interested in starting with Mbeumo, especially if Tony goes. I think that could be a great shout. You mentioned Reguilon. I want to see who is playing on the outside in defense for them, whether it's Reguilon, whether it's Rico Henry coming back. They have Rorslev that was playing on the other side. They also have Ben Mee, who I think if he's 4.5 is a pretty solid 4.5 defender, as well as Ethan Pinnock and the goalkeeper. I think there is a lot of 7 to 4.5 players on this particular team that has a realistic chance of, finishing top 8, something like that next season. That's really interesting to me. What about price predictions for Brentford? What do you think Mbeumo comes in at next season?
I don't know, because like you said, he was injured. He scored a lot of points, but I don't see him getting a massive price rise, right? I mean, Wissa ended at 5.7 and Mbeumo ended at 6.8. I could totally see a world where Wissa's at 6 and Mbeumo's at 6.5 or 7, but I don't think it's any higher than that.
Yeah, I agree. If Tony leaves and they don't sign another striker, I would imagine that Mbeumo will be 7 and Wissa will be 6.5. If they do sign another striker, I could see Wissa going down to 6, but I'm not sure that Mbeumo is going to get too much of a discount below 7. I think he's either 6.5 or 7. That's going to be a very.
Do you think they both stay as forwards?
If Thomas Frank is there, then I think yes. The other guy that they got was Kevin Schade. He's from Germany. He's very good. His underlying numbers are very good, but he didn't get a lot of minutes this year because he's a younger guy. But when they played 3 up top, he was the other player, so he could come in as a 4.5 or 5.0 midfielder that ends up getting some starts. But the nice thing with manager consistency is we kind of know the formation that they're going to
Yeah.
play, right? And what we saw is no Ivan Toney and Bumo's up top. So I tend to believe that until proven otherwise for next season.
Yeah, that's fair.
Our next team on the list is Chelsea, finishing sixth with 63 points. They had 65.1 non-penalty expected goals, which was good for sixth in the league. 54.1 non-penalty expected goals allowed for an expected goal differential of 11, which was good for fifth in the league. Offensively, they were sixth. Defensively, they were ninth. Now, obviously, Chelsea is going to be a little bit weird with a new manager coming in next season. The top scoring players from this season were Cole Palmer, who was FPL's number one overall scorer at 244 points. Top scoring forward was Nico Jackson with 142 points. And the top scoring defender, surprisingly, was actually Thiago Silva with 98 points for Chelsea. Are you buying or selling Chelsea next season?
I don't know. If Pochettino would stayed, I could totally say I would be buying Chelsea. You could see they were getting momentum, especially with some injuries coming back and players being healthy, like Reece James when he gets back from suspension, right? I totally could have seen him being one of my first transfers in, and Cuckoo and all that. But it looks like Enzo Maresca is going to be your guys' new manager. We got the here we go from Fabrizio earlier today. I've seen some pretty conflicting things about the way he plays. Didn't know if you had an opinion on him yet or not as your next manager.
It makes sense to me why the Chelsea board went with him because Pochettino plays more of an aggressive, free flowing, attacking style. And I think that's where sort of Chelsea's ownership poked holes in performance to say, yes, we're generating a lot of expected goals. Cole Palmer is having this great season, but we're not really controlling or dominating games, which ended up costing Chelsea the Champions League at the end of the season. You know, they drew away to Sheffield United and they drew at home to 10-man Burnley, right? Those two games really were the difference in the outcome of the season. With Enzo, not the midfielder, the manager, he plays a much more possession based style where it's designed to kind of control games, limit opportunities for your opponents. I think one thing that's interesting is that he likes to do the inverted fullback. So you'll see a fullback for Chelsea come inside and essentially they'll play a 3-2-4-1. It's very similar to how Pep plays at City, where you have the John Stones role in midfield. So one guy I wanted to mention that I think could benefit from this is Cucurella, depending on who Chelsea signs, because under Pochettino, Cucurella was the inverted midfield role. That role in FPL tends to attract bonus points if you're a defender because you are completing a high number of passes. So he's somebody for me, if he comes in at 4 or 5, does make his way into the first team for Chelsea and plays that inverted role. I think there is going to be some value there. So I guess for buy and sell, I think I am buying some of the Chelsea defensive assets, given that they've got a more defensive minded manager. But I might be tempted to sell some of the non Cole Palmer attacking assets. I think it's going to be much harder for Nico Jackson to duplicate his success from this year. So that's kind of where I'm at on the new team structure.
It just seems like, from what I've seen, from what I watched a little bit of Leicester, right? But from what I've seen, he seems pretty unyielding in his play style. Like he's not going to adapt no matter who he plays against, which is fine. But Vincent Kompany had this similar mentality in games, especially the first half of the season. We saw how that worked out for Burnley. So I don't know. He's not coached in the Premier League before, right? He's taking over Chelsea. We've had a lot of, well, maybe not a lot of, but you've had a run of managers who have not made it past their first year. Do you think he's the guy that's going to hang on for more than half a season, or are we bringing Lampard back in May or whatever like they did last time because he's just not going to work out? Like what? I mean, that's what I'm looking for, and I think that's probably what the players are looking for too. Is hey, we just want some consistency because Enzo, the player, not the coach, will have played for more managers for Chelsea than he scored goals by the time the season kicks off in a few months. And I think that's really hard as a player to continue to adjust to constantly.
Long story short, I think he has to be. I don't think that they have the money, frankly, to burn through another. I'm serious, another manager and another backroom staff. They really paid a lot in terms of compensation to Brighton for Graham Potter for his entire staff. That was also a 5-year contract.
Yeah.
Then they had to pay Lampard, and then
and Potter still doesn't have another job, so they're still paying him.
They're still paying Potter. Tuchel, right? Lampard came in a caretaker role, so there was no financial obligation beyond. But my point is that these costs, I think, are really adding up for Chelsea, and they don't have 20 million, 30 million that they can spend to get rid of another coaching staff and pay another team to bring in an entirely new coaching staff. So for me, I think it's safe to assume, pending disaster, you never know, Chaos FC, but he's going to be the guy at least through next season, just for FFP reasons.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll see. Jury's still out then on the forwards. I see what you mean about the defenders, especially because Chelsea seemed to have a really good back line of promising defenders, right? I don't really like Cucurella personally, but you had Gusto out there, Reece James, Ben Chilwell, right? All those guys who are kind of FPL staples. And if we're playing the inverted fullback role, right, you're getting a lot of those defenders up the pitch. I can totally see them being attractive assets again, but I'm just going to have to wait and see. Like you said, we don't have the consistency of the manager like we do with Frank, so we don't know how they're going to set up and who's going to be where and even how they're going to be classified. So I'm probably out on Chelsea to start, with the exception of Cole Palmer, depending on how much he is. And that leads us to, where do you think Cole Palmer is going to land price point wise next season, Chris?
I think he is going to be 9 million. I think he should be higher, but it's going to be difficult for FPL to increase him more than 4 million season over season. What about you?
I'm saying 8 million. I think he's going to be in the Pascal Gross weird price point range of like, okay, he's not crazy expensive, but he's also not cheap enough to be a value midfielder. And I think a lot of people are going to leave him out for that reason.
Okay, I was going to say if he's 8 million, I think he's 70% owned, if not more. Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll see.
Moving on to our next team, it's Crystal Palace, who finished with a late season surge on 49 points, which was good for 10th overall in the league. Their non-penalty expected goals were 45.4, which is good for 16th. Their non-penalty expected goals allowed was 49.6, which was good for 5th in the league. So overall, their non-penalty expected goal difference was a minus 4.2, which is good for 13th of the teams remaining in the Premier League. Now, Palace, I think, is probably a buy for everyone. It's really how high can we get on Crystal Palace, right? I mean, where are you at on this team?
I'm a buyer for sure. The only question mark I have is who's going to be there, right? I don't think anybody's getting any ridiculous price rises from Crystal Palace because they were such a late season team. But I mean, where do you think they land if Glasner comes in at the beginning of the season as opposed to at the halfway mark? Because I think they're ahead of United for sure. Just the way they finished out the season, right? They were I think they were the 4th most informed team at the end of the season behind City, Arsenal, and Chelsea. So I don't know. I think they're probably up there for sure, right?
I think that they're definitely competing for a European place, and maybe not Champions League, but Conference League, Europa League. Have they been playing this way the entire season? For sure. Now, the question is, I think, to your point, does Elise or Eze go in the transfer window? It seems like Elise is the more likely of the two. And if not, what do these midfielders come in priced at?
It's a great question. I think they're going to be pretty similar to where they're ending on. I don't know that they're going to get any crazy price rise just because, like I said, I mean, they didn't really peak until the end, Eze being, I think, the best of the midfield options, and he ended at 6. I mean, don't you think they started at 6'5", 6? I mean, I don't see him going higher than that. And Mateta ended at 5'1". I mean, I still see him in that same kind of price point. You know, he wasn't like going crazy by he had a great like last 4 matches, but they're not going to give him a huge price rise just based on his last 5 games of the season, you know.
I could see as an Elise landing around 6.5 to 7.
Really?
More
They're
whatever
going to go that high, huh?
whatever Mbumo is. I
Do you
think
think they'll match it?
that they should also be the same price. Now, actually, going back to Mbumo, you think he gets reclassified as a forward? Because I think that would be
That's what I was
a
asking.
material difference
That's what I
here.
was asking you in the Brentford chat. Is do you think they're in the same position as they are now?
Okay.
That was my initial question to you.
When
Is
we were talking about it, I thought it was kind of like team structure. I see him
okay,
still playing up top, but from an FPL standpoint, yeah, maybe they do change in Mbumo's
yeah,
position. So
go forward.
yeah, at that point, yeah, he if he's 6.5. I could see him as a 6.5 forward and a 7 million mid, whereas Eze Elise are definitely midfielders. It's really hard for me to say between the 6.5 and 7 for them, but I don't think it's more than 7 for either player.
For our case, I hope it starts with a 6. Still, I'll say that. I hope as a and Elise both stay around the 6 million mark, just because I think, yeah, they're in great form. But if the game elevates everybody up to this kind of like large, like 1.5 to 2 million like price change, we're not going to be able to afford anybody. You know, like it's going to be really tough, and the game's not going to be as fun. Some people would say, "Oh, well, it just makes you be more creative with who you do get." Right? If everybody can't buy the same team or whatever. But to me, that wouldn't make the game a whole lot of fun because I want to own those Palace assets. You know, that was the most fun week I had in FPL was
Right.
during double game week where we free hit into those guys. So that's where I'm at. Definitely buying the project though. Most excited about that classification of team Crystal Palace over any of them outside of the big six. So they'll be in my team for sure.
I should mention before we move on, top scoring players for Crystal Palace last season. Number 1, Mateta, with 165 points, despite really only coming on during the last 7-8 game weeks of the season. Kind of an incredible run for him. Number 2 was Eze with 136, and Elise right behind at 125. The top scoring defender for Crystal Palace was Anderson at 121. I think you and I are obviously very high on Munoz, and to a lesser degree Mitchell, given that they switched to back 5 from a back 4.
Yeah, and two, even more so, Chris Richards. I think could be a really great player under Glasner if he stays healthy. He's got aerial threat on corners. He's always up there. So definitely he's the potential option there too, especially with his propensity to play in the midfield as well as that holding midfield role towards the end of Roy's tenure there.
Let's move on to our next team, which is Everton. And I don't know how to report how many points Everton got because they had some point deductions this season, but we'll go with what's on Football Reference. So overall, they had 42 points, which was good for 15th in the league. Their non-penalty expected goals were 51.6, which was good for 11th on offense. Their non-penalty expected goals allowed was 49.1, which is good for the 4th best defensive record in the league. That led to a non-penalty expected goal differential of 2.5, which was good for the 7th best team in the league. The top scoring players for Everton, Pickford with 153 points was the top scoring defender. Branthwaite was the 5th overall defender, like true defender in FPL with 124 points. Dwight McNeil had 124 points as well as a midfielder. And the top scoring forward was Dominic Calvert-Lewin with 101 points. So obviously the numbers love Everton. If you take away the points deductions, they had a really, really strong year in terms of defensive performance that kind of carried them throughout. Are you buying or selling this Everton team next year?
Listen, I wasn't buying them during this season, and it kind of bit me in the butt, like you said, because Brantwaite and Pickford were both performing really well. Um, I think Pickford would be the only position I'm going to look at hard, just because he ended the season at 4.8, so he'll probably be a $5.5 million goalkeeper, right? Last season, they made the goalkeepers all pretty affordable for the most part. I expect they'll replicate that again. So really just Pickford, but beyond that, I'm not really convinced. Brantwaite, again, could be in there as well if I need a spot for a defender like him. But outside of their defense, I'm not buying Everton players. I just can't get excited about owning an Everton asset given their form the last 3 seasons and maybe even more, right?
Yeah, I think the numbers reflect that with the 11th best offense and the 4th best defense,
Yeah.
considering that FPL kind of prices all of the assets based on the total team finish. They're one of the most imbalanced teams in the league in terms of offensive and defensive performance. So I agree with you. I'm very much a buy on a 4.5 Everton defender or a 4.5 Jordan Pickford.
Yeah.
Probably a sell on their attacking assets unless somehow DCL comes back from the dead to revive his career. He is the 60, 70-minute guy over Beto. He's on pens. It's set up for Everton. If he is a 5.5 to 6 million forward that starts showing up, I could see him emerge as an option. But yeah, otherwise it's probably, let's say Branthwaite gets sold, Tarkowski 4.5 or even Mikolenko on the outside, I think are the most
Yeah.
interesting guys here.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have much more on Everton. Yeah, it's a Sean Dyche team, which is pretty good defensively, right? So we can assume they're going to continue that endeavor. But yeah, beyond that, I don't have much else.
What do you think Jordan Pickford is priced at? Do you think we get away with 4.5 or do you think he's up to 5 as the top scoring keeper?
Maybe 5. Yeah. 5 at a minimum. Yeah.
Right. Our last team for today is Fulham, who finished with 47 points in 13th place. Overall, their non-penalty expected goals for was 49.2, which is good for 13th in the league. Non-penalty expected goals against was 56.9, which is good for 11th in the league, leading to a negative 7.7 non-penalty expected goal differential, good for 14th overall. The top scoring players for Fulham, number 1 was Leno with 133 points. Then we had Andreas Pereira in the midfield with 127 points. And the top scoring forward for Fulham, not a surprise, was Muniz with 97 points, despite, again, really only coming on later in the season. Are you buying or selling Fulham next year?
Yeah, buying for sure. I've always liked their assets in FPL. I think they provide really good value. In the way they've been playing, they've at least been consistent. They seem to drop off at the end of the last season, which was kind of, or at the end of this past season, which is kind of a shame, but I also don't know what they had to play for. And I think that plays into it. They had some injuries too, right? But to me, I feel like they've been really consistent the last 2 seasons. So your Anthony Robinsons, your Lenos, your Pereiras, your Munizes, I'm looking at all 4 of those assets, especially if they have another striker come in, right, or another attacker. But I think they've got some great value picks. So I'll definitely buy someone from the Fulham side.
I'm a buy as well, and it's not because I think Fulham are a team that I expect to necessarily improve next season. It's more that Fulham are a team that, like you said, I know what they are. And we've talked about this before where there's something systemically in the way that they play that seems to crank out forwards. I mean, we saw it last season with Mitrovic coming up from the championship into this team. We saw Raul Jimenez earlier this season, and now we're seeing Muniz in that spot. And it doesn't take away from the individual talent of those players, but it does seem like Fulham, despite not having a lot of like name brand attackers find ways to generate production from the forward spot. And I would say the same thing for the goalkeeper too. This is the second season in a row that Leno has been one of the best keepers in FPL. So, they're going to have the same manager. Muniz is likely still going to be up top. Leno is still likely going to be in goal. Anthony Robinson is likely still going to be there, defensively.
Well, I think he'll probably go somewhere else this summer, but if he's still there, yeah, I'm definitely a buy on Robinson as a that defender that I don't want to play unless he has to.
Timothy Castagna too is right there in the team as well. I mean, they were basically identical from a points standpoint. So whoever that attacking fullback from Fulham is 4.5, I think is an easy pick. Yeah, I always seem to, I think at the beginning of the season, underrate Fulham or not really consider Fulham, but I think I should next season give them pay a little bit more attention just because of the consistency that they bring as a team.
Yeah, they also don't concede a ton of goals, especially at home either. The anecdote was they didn't concede more than 2 goals in a game until the City game at home, right? Which was when City was on their tear. So there's something to be said for that too. They could sneak out the occasional clean sheet, but yeah, like I said, I'm buying Fulham assets in some capacity next season for sure.
Yeah, same here. It is part 2 of our team by team 2023-2024 Premier League season recaps. We are on to Liverpool, who finished third overall with 82 points. They had a non-penalty expected goal total of 80.4, which is good for first in the league. They had a non-penalty expected goals allowed total of 45, good for third in the league, with a non-penalty expected goal differential of 35.4, also good for third in the league. So we're looking at the number 1 attack here and the number 3 defense overall, number 3 team in the Premier League from last season. Their top point scorers, Mo Salah with 211 points, Luis Diaz with 142, Darwin was the top scoring forward with 132 points, and Trent Alexander-Arnold was the top scoring defender with 122 points. Now, with a new manager coming in and potentially, the last season of Mo Salah in the Premier League, maybe, are you buying or selling Liverpool next season?
I think I'm selling to start, Chris. And again, it all depends on the player situation, right? Who stays, who goes, how they're going to set up, right? Is Trent going to play in the defensive role? Is he going to be more of a center mid, right? Is Salah staying? Is he going? Who are they bringing in to give competition to Darwin outside of Gakpo, right? I've seen links with Somerville from Leeds coming over potentially. I've seen links with Robinson going to Liverpool. And that's all to say. Like, that's why I'm confused. Is there's just a lot up in the air with Liverpool. They didn't really finish with that great of form, right? They only won 2 of their last 5 matches. I get it. It was Klopp's farewell, right? Like, understandable, but there's not enough there for me to be confident that I want to own a Liverpool asset, especially if the prices are what we think they're going to be for your Trents and your Mo Salahs and stuff like that. With all the other price rises that we're going to see, I don't know that that's where I want to put my chips.
Is Liverpool the most difficult game week 1 team?
I think they are. Yeah.
Because they have a new manager. They have kind of an aging star. They have a bunch of question marks in attack between, I think, Darwin, Gakpo, Diaz, Jota. Defensively, they were still the 3rd best team from a non-penalty standpoint last year, but they weren't elite. I don't think Trent or Van Dijk were justifying their price points versus some of the other defenders in the game. So on the one hand, you have a team that's definitely going to be one of the 4 best teams in the league next season. On the other hand, I think you just have so much uncertainty about what the attack is going to look like that it's going to be weird to recognize how good of a team Liverpool is, but maybe only have one Liverpool asset, maybe. And today, I don't know who that is.
And the quality of Liverpool was never really in question, but even the consistency, like you said, the defenders, they kept X amount of clean sheets and all that stuff, but it was like, okay, Trent wasn't healthy for a lot of the season. Robo was in and out, right? Uh, the Greek guy was in and out. You know,
Szoboszlai, Hungarian, right? Is that what you're talking about? Or Simicas? Simicas.
yeah.
Yeah.
Bradley was in, he was hot, then he was out. Klopp played a lot of the use. There wasn't a lot of consistent minutes, and that was what was the hard part about owning some of those Liverpool assets, especially towards kind of the latter half of the season. So, with that being as inconsistent as it was with Klopp, without him and a new manager, I think it's just going to be even more up in the air. And I think you're right. I think they're going to be the hardest one to peg down outside of like a Man United or some of those teams that are in the Brighton, right, that are still kind of up in the air. But for as far as quality goes, I think they're the best team that I'm going to have the hardest time with picking who I want to own from there.
Any price predictions if Salah stays next season? Where do you think he lands?
I don't know that they can make him much more expensive, right? I mean, he's already almost at 13 and a half, which I think he is the most. Is he, or he's second most expensive next to Holland? He is the most expensive.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, yeah, he's second most expensive to Holland. Surely they're not going to have two 14 plus $1 million players in the game, right?
Yeah. If anything, I think Salah gets a decrease in price this season, which is crazy because he still scored over 200 points, but he was, for me, below Palmer, below Saka, below Foden. I think it's going to be difficult to price him, more than 2 million more than those guys next season. So I see him as, 12 million max next year, and then potentially as low as 10. It'll just be kind of interesting to see how much FPL Towers buys into Salah's regression or kind of his history of consistent performances over the years. I think he similar to Liverpool might be one of the most difficult players to price because I think he still is the second most expensive asset. That's not really Holland. So whatever Salah is priced at almost determines what you can do with the other guys. I mean, do you agree with that? Do you think he actually is the most expensive? Okay.
Yeah, I do. And the consistency is there, right? He only scored 6 less points than Holland, and he actually scored 2 less than Sonny, who's at 10 million. So it's like, okay, there's it depends on where they're using the bar, what the barometer is, right? Where they're gauging it off of. But I think the consistent Mo Salah is still there. It's just a matter of if, like you said, they buy into like he's aging out. This is probably his last season in the Premier League, if so, and he's losing a step, just like Sonny is. I think they're players in similar positions. The only difference being Salah's won stuff in his career and Sonny hasn't, right? But beyond that, Salah's probably still on penalties, so you've got that to consider. And Liverpool are always going to be pretty good, so I think it'll be tough. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. If anything, you're getting the penalty taker on one of the consensus top 4 teams, like regardless of, hey, he's maybe falling off a little bit, right? He's still going to have a great chance at a 20-goal season regardless. So, agree. Let's move on to the champions, Manchester City, who finished first overall with 91 points this season. They accumulated 72.9 non-penalty expected goals, which is good for second in the league. They allowed 33.2 non-penalty expected goals against, which was also good for second in the league. And this is going to surprise you. They finished with a non-penalty expected goal differential of 39.7, also good for second in the league. It's weird talking about Manchester City as the champions, but pretty consistently by a decent margin, the second best team in the league this season. I think that's a little bit unique. Top scoring players this season, Phil Foden with his breakout year with 230 points, Erling Haaland with 217 points. Rodrigo was a little bit of a surprise with 159 points out of midfield. And the top scoring defender for Manchester City was Kyle Walker with 123 points. Are you buying or selling City assets next season? I think obviously as one of the best teams, we're buying. I guess it's kind of, do you buy the shape and the players that succeeded within City system this season, or do you see changes on the horizon?
I don't see too many changes because, four in a row, it's hard to argue with that kind of outcome. I get what you're saying about the stats, but really the only one that matters is total points at the end of the season, and they finished first there, right? I can't tell you the number of times Tottenham finished with being ahead every stat category other than the one that's putting goals in the back of the net, which is the only one that matters, right? But all that being said, yeah, I'm buying City. I still think they're gonna do what they do, but I'm gonna be less on them at the start of the season. I think whether that's only owning Holland or Holland and Foden. I don't think I'd triple up on City off the bat, just because I think what we've seen the last couple of seasons is they have faltered a little bit at the beginning. They're still winning, but they're conceding goals, right? It's conceding silly goals. Maybe they're not scoring from the spots they want to score, but someone's pulling out a worldie like Rodri, right? Having a couple rockets here and there. So I think Holland and Foden are the only two that I'm really on right now, with Guardiola being kind of in the back of my mind. Just it all depends on the price point and what you're able to do, right? What kind of team you're putting together. But Holland's the only one that I'm definitely gonna start with, as long as we mentioned last podcast, he's not playing Arsenal and Liverpool right off the bat. So that's where I'm at with the City situation. What do you think?
I think it's going to be very difficult for me or for many engaged FPL managers not to start with a triple up of Holland, Foden, and Gvardiol, because you have the best forward in the game, the player of the season from last year, and what I think emerged late in the season as the clear best defensive asset on one of the best defensive teams in the league. Like, if at the beginning of the season there's more sort of like uncertainty, we always know that City is going to be one of the best teams in the league. We always know that Holland is going to be one of the best forwards in the league, right? I just think
Yeah, we're
there's
certain the
too
quality is going
much.
to be there, but are we certain the players are going to be where we think they are, right? And that's kind of what I'm getting at. They're coming off this 4P. I get it. Guardiola had a shocker of an FA Cup final. Everybody's fallible, right? Everybody's human. I get it, but are they going to be are they going to be hungry? Are they going to keep that same mentality going into this next season after just winning 4 Premier Leagues in a row? And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is I think they're going to be a bit on the beach at the beginning. And that's why I'm going to steer clear, I think, from the defensive assets. I will definitely own Foden or Holland or both, right? But I don't know that I'm going to triple up for that reason. I think there are a lot of uncertainties. Pep Roulette's a real thing, especially if they do start out slow. We know he's not afraid to yank players off and start like the Rico Lewis's and your Oscar Bobs and players like that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, looking at City, just trying to be realistic about the mentality some of these players are going to have coming into this season in a couple of months.
What are your price predictions for Foden and Holland next season?
I think Holland's going to be 14. I think that's where he's going to probably land. I don't think you can get away with 14.5, just because, how high are you going to push that top number, right? Do we know what the ceiling is for FPL assets? Who the most expensive one in history has been?
I think it's 14. I'd have to look it up, but I think there was like Thierry Henry and Cristiano Ronaldo, maybe, were each 14 million going into a season. And I want to say, again, we'll have to double check this, but I want to say of those three, Holland had the best season after being priced 14 million, because a lot of those guys played so many minutes the season prior that I think it was difficult to play the same number of games, have the same level of production the following season.
You were spot on. Thierry Henry at 14 million in 05-06, and Ronaldo at 14 million in 08-09, and Van Persie was in that same category as well. So I think he's going to start at 14 million. He's at 14.3 now, ending the season. I don't think he goes to 14.5, but if he is 14 million, Foden is probably going to be 10 million, right? What's KDB? He was at 10.6 ending the season, so I totally see him being around the 10 number as well. If it's not double digits, I'll definitely own Foden as well. I just think you're going to spend 25 million on the two of them. That's a quarter of your budget, two players.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it will be 14 for Holland again and an increase to 10 million for Foden. I think that makes the most sense to me. Let's move on across town to Manchester United, finishing 8th this season with an FA Cup victory on 60 points. They accumulated 50.9 non-penalty expected goals, which is good for 12th in the league. They allowed 63.6 non-penalty expected goals against, which is 17th. So it's the worst figure of teams that are remaining in the Premier League this season, for an overall non-penalty expected goal differential of negative 12.7, which was good for 15th. This is probably the largest gap, I would have to double check, between the actual table finishing position and the non-penalty expected goal differential of any team.
No, I think you're 100% right? Because look, they finished with a -1 goal differential overall. The next highest person was Tottenham with +13 goal differential. That's 14 between them and the next person that finished higher than them.
There's another team actually that we're going to talk about in a bit that had a similar discrepancy between table finish and non-penalty expected goal differential, but they are definitely one of the worst offenders in the league in terms of their actual results versus their underlying numbers. I was going to mention their top scoring players this season. Bruno Fernandes finished on 166 points after a slow start. He really did kind of come on towards the end of the season. The top defender was Onana with 133 points. Garnacho finished with 131 points, and the top scoring forward was Højlund with 112, followed closely by Dallo with 111. They had a lot of guys kind of finish between the 130 and 90 point total that I think a lot of people had at the beginning of the season. So given, not so great from an underlying numbers standpoint, are you buying or selling Manchester United next season?
I'm selling Manchester United next season. I think they're going to make a lot of moves in the offseason and offload a ton of people. I think there's going to be a lot of inconsistency, and they're also probably going to have a new manager as well. You're just looking at what Ratcliffe is trying to do with United, right? Have you seen this thing circulating about his 5 new United transfer rules or back?
Tell me.
Rule number 1, age limit of 25 max for new signings. So they won't sign anyone older than 25. 2, no Galacticos. So no more Casemiros, right? None of that. No more Ronaldos. 3, style of play to be set by the technical director, Jason Wilcox. Number 4, manager to be asked what position he wants to sign, not what player. And then 5 is Ineos will send him a list of 3 signings per position, and they'll get to choose and try and get the deal done from there. So I think you're seeing a lot of oversight, a lot of control from the United front office, and that's going to go one of two ways, right? So I think there's an equal amount of inconsistency like you have with Liverpool. The only difference being Liverpool is a good team and United is not in the current environment, right? But you never know, right? Bruno is a hell of a player, and I don't think anybody can deny that, right? I think he's world-class, horrible attitude, great player. Garnacho, super valuable at that 5th midfield spot. So if he's still there, still performing and still at a similar price, I can see people gravitating towards that stuff. But I think for the most part, I'm out. Højlund could be interesting. I have a very similar feeling about him that I did with Nunez from last season and Nico Jackson this season. I mean, a successful debut season for Højlund.
His underlying statistics, like non-penalty expected goals, are significantly worse than Nick Jackson's, and
Okay,
obviously he was double the transfer fee.
that's
However,
true. He was expensive.
Hoyland is 19, whereas Nick Jackson is 22. So being 3 years younger, I don't know that you would say that his debut season was a success, but I would be hard pressed to call it a failure after a single season.
Okay.
The backroom stuff that you bring up, I mean, I feel like this is kind of what Manchester United fans have been clamoring for, right? Is like some sort of
Yeah.
sporting direction, some sort of centralization of the sporting department so that the decisions are not necessarily being made by commercial entities, but by people who know football, right? That have some
Yeah.
sort of organized brain where it's not just every single manager is signing his 30-year-old, even Ten Hag, right? Went out and signed Antony and Lisandro Martinez and basically a bunch of guys from the Netherlands because United does not have a transfer policy. So whether this particular group is successful or not, at least they are sort of applying principles of modern football club management, which is more than what you can say they've done in the past. In terms of their assets, I think I'm a buy on Manchester United, as crazy as it seems, because to me, a lot of their performance issues were injury related. We look at
I
the
don't know
amount
that
of
I buy that.
time.
I don't know that I buy that.
Listen, they had to play Alejandro Garnacho 17, and maybe not so much injury related for him. He played a ton of minutes this season. Johnny
Yeah,
Evans
but
played
that's
a
not injury
ton of
related. That's
minutes this
personnel
season.
related. He sent Sancho away, who is playing for a Champions League trophy in just a few days, right? Will have already played by the time this podcast goes out, right? But and then Anthony was dog shit for
Yeah,
most of
Antony
the
was bad.
season. You know what I mean?
Antony
You
was
spent
bad.
$100 million on a player that doesn't perform, and the U21 player is performing that you didn't pay a ton of money for, and you went out and got organically. I'll tell you, there's only two U21s currently in the Premier League that had 10 plus goals and assists this season. Do you know who they were?
Garnacho, I'm
Yep.
assuming, is one. And Hoyland?
Yep. And Hoyland. Yeah, exactly. Now, granted, Cole Palmer turned 22, so he's not in that category anymore, right? These stats are always funny. But, I mean, yeah, you're gonna sit him just because you didn't pay $100 million for him? I don't know that it's all injury. They had a lot of injury issues with their back line. I get that, but they have bigger problems than injuries. Like, I don't even know what style of football Ten Hag wanted to play for most of the season. I couldn't tell you. I asked my
Yeah,
brothers multiple times, and I don't know that they could tell me either. But
that's
I'm just
fair.
I have similar feelings towards United as I do towards Liverpool. Like I said, the only difference is Liverpool is a good team in good form right now, right? Whereas United is not, even though they just won the FA Cup.
Yeah. I should amend my statement to say that it is partially injury related and partially recruitment related for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
But especially the back line to me, Ten Hag, in terms of the questions about the style of play, we at least know that he's kind of a more possession oriented manager. And when they had games where they sort of played this counter-attacking style, I think of the match they had against Luton, and Luton sucks, so grain of salt. But there was a clear identity there where there was sort of an outball to Bruno, an outball to Hoyland, who would then, we were talking about it on the last episode or 2 episodes ago. Well, it's like Harry Kane would spray the ball wide to a winger. They have too much talent to be as bad as they are. And I think with a little bit more injury luck, I would possibly consider a 4.5 to 5.0 defender on this team. I would consider a 6 to 6.5 Marcus Rashford, not an 8.5 Marcus Rashford. I would think about a 7 to 7.5 Bruno Fernandes. I would think about a 6.5 Rasmus Hoyland. I just think you're going to get a discount on these guys after what was a very bad year from a squad availability standpoint that maybe we can take advantage of. So that's kind of why I'm a buy on them.
yeah. I think you make fair points. If the value is there, listen, I'm not gonna shoot myself in the foot, but I'm just not sold. I do like Dallo. I like Dallo, but will he be there consistently enough moving into this next season with a newer manager, right? Or even if Ten Hag stays, I don't know personally, but I like Hoyland too and Garnacho. Like I don't dislike the players. I just think there's a mess there that needs to get sorted out before I can
Sure.
trust any consistency from those assets. And I think Bruno's going to be too expensive.
Fair enough. Let's move on to Newcastle United, who finished just above Manchester United on goal difference with 60 points, good for 7th place. They generated 69.2 non-penalty expected goals, good for 3rd in the league offensively. They allowed 57.4 non-penalty expected goals against, which was only good for 12th in the league, leading to a non-penalty expected goal differential of 11.8, which was good for 4th in the league, just above 5th place Chelsea. So you're looking at, from a numbers standpoint, the best team in the league, not named Arsenal, Liverpool, or Manchester City. Their top players from this season: Anthony Gordon scored 183 points, Alexander Isak scored 172 points, and Schär in defense scored 123 points. Now, given that they're out of Europe, which I think is an important consideration here, are you buying or selling Newcastle next season?
I'm buying. Yeah. I think you just hit the nail on the head with the not in Europe. I think they'll put a really good campaign together. I think some players will leave, like Guimaraes looks like he's got $100 million price tag on him, and PSG/Man City, Arsenal, whoever kind of want him. I can see him leaving and then replacing him with a player that's of equal quality. But Gordon, great. Isak, great. You waxed lyric on Isak last episode, and I think you're spot on with the volume of minutes. He could have a 30-plus goal season. And I like their defenders, too. They've got some good options there, especially goalkeeper-wise. So I think there's some good opportunity for value there. I don't think any of their players are going to get crazy price rises. We might even get a decent price fall from Kieran Trippier to take him out of that premium category, given how injury-prone he was this season in his performance, which I think he was set second in goal contributions for a defender in the Premier League this season. I think Pedro Porro was first. You might have
that sounds right to me, but yeah,
right,
double check.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm in on Newcastle, especially if Howe stays and they continue the project. I think there's still a little bit up in the air there, but yeah, I'm on Newcastle. What do you think?
I would agree with everything you just said. Honestly, I don't have much to contest. I think there's no Europe, which we mentioned is a big advantage for their assets, given that from a numbers standpoint, they were the 4th best team in the league. Guimaraes would be a loss, but they didn't really get Tonali to play very many minutes last season after his gambling suspension. Joe Linton got injured, and basically their entire back line for portions of the season was out. So I think they even have some positive regression coming, as opposed to negative. Really, the only question for me is, what do you think Isak, Gordon, and Trippier are priced at?
Yeah, great. That's the question, right? Isak ended at 8.4, so I can totally see him starting at 8.5. I don't know that he gets to 9, but I can totally see him starting at 8.5, just given, I don't know that, like you said, he scored a lot of goals, but I don't know if FPL Towers are going to look at, what he could have scored if he played more minutes and all of that. So I think Isak's at 8.5. Anthony Gordon is a whole other conversation because he was a good value midfielder at around the 6 number, right? He ends close to 6.5. If he starts at 6.5 or 7, I don't know if the value's still there. I don't know if there people go elsewhere at that point, but I'd like to see him stay around that, if not back to the $6 million dollar range. And Trippier is the big one because he ends at 6.6, and he didn't have that amazing of a season. 111 points. Right, he missed out on a ton of games. Do you think he gets a discount because of that? You think he's back closer to 6?
I think 6 is reasonable. If Ben White, I think, is the most expensive defender in the game at 7, and then let's say Gavard and the Arsenal center backs are 6'5", and maybe Trent is 6'5", I would see Trippier as 6, like directly below those
Yeah.
guys. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, that logic makes a ton of sense, right? Now, obviously, if he's less than that, hell yeah. If he's more than that, I'll go elsewhere, right? You'll go to your Arsenal defender. You'll go to your Guardiola, right? I think we both agreed we were going to be a little more less premium in the back line going into this next season. So you're probably picking one of those, but that's what I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with that ranking. He's not quite worth what those other guys are worth, and he might be a weird one where, if a lot of people like us are thinking one premium and then a bunch of cheap guys in defense, he might be left out of a lot of teams. But, if Newcastle come out with a great fixture run to start the season, maybe you convince yourself to go Trippier over some of these other players if it enables another midfield pick that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I could see that. Let's move on to Nottingham Forest. Finished 17th in the league, the worst team still remaining in the Premier League after this season on 32 points. They had 49.1 non-penalty expected goals accumulated, good for 14th in the league. They allowed 50.1 non-penalty expected goals against, which was actually good for the 6th best defense in the league, which led to a total -1 non-penalty expected goal differential, good for 12th overall in the league. So a team that underperformed their non-penalty expected goal difference in terms of their position in the table. Their top scorers from this season, Morgan Gibbs-White finished on 142 points with a final price of 5.7. Chris Wood finished on 131 points with a final price of 4.7. And Anthony Alonga finished with 119 points on a final price of 4.9. I'm not even going to mention a defender here because none of their defensive assets, either defenders or goalkeepers, finished with above 60 points. I think they just had a lot of turnover in defense and goalkeeper this season. Buy or sell Nottingham Forest?
Sell. I like Gibbs White. I'll say that. So I might look at him as a cheap midfielder if he stays in that price bracket or even back to the 5.5 realm, right? Which is, I'm assuming, where he started at. But I liked owning Gibbs White. He was part of my plan in the run-in, as we mentioned, and he performed almost bang on what I expected. So if he stays at Forest, he would probably be the only one I'd look at, along with Hudson-Odoi potentially, as long as there's a price correction there. But I think both of them have been offered to a lot of clubs, so we'll see. I don't know that they'll stay, but those would be the only two that I would really look at. But other than that, I'm selling.
Agree. I don't think they'll be in a lot of teams, obviously, given where they finished, but a 5.5 Morgan Gibbs-White as a 5th mid to start the season, or a 5.0 Chris Wood as a 3rd forward to start the season, I could see as an attractive option, kind of depending on the fixtures, because we at least know that those two guys at the end of last season were fairly nailed on. We'll see what happens with Awoniyi, because 2 seasons ago, he kind of had a really, really impressive stretch run with Forest. And there was a part of this season where I thought, given Forest had a nice fixture run coming in, that he might come back into the team. Struggled with injuries last season. And Chris Wood honestly played really well. So we'll kind of see what happens with him. But he would be the only very under the radar guy that I would at least still think about. And certainly not a guy you're going to have game week 1, but kind of depending on how things go, maybe he comes back into the fold at some point next season as an example. Let's move on to Tottenham, who finished.
That's right. Come on, you Spurs.
This past season with 66 points going to the Europa League. They accumulated a non-penalty expected goal total of 66.7, which was good for 5th overall, while allowing 58.4 non-penalty expected goals against, which is good for 14th.
Well, how many of those were on free kicks, though? Come on.
Right, we gotta throw out the free kicks.
Throw out the Nick Jackson goals; those don't count either.
I was going to say we really should throw out the red card minutes, but I didn't do this.
Yeah,
This is just
yeah,
the raw data.
yeah.
But anyway, they landed on a total non-penalty expected goal differential of 8.3, which is good for the sixth best team in the league. So they finished kind of about
Where we
what
expected them
they
to. Yeah.
expected to achieve. Top scoring players, Sonny with 213 points this season. Pedro Porro in defense with 136 points this season. And similar to what I just said about Forest defenders, there's really no Spurs forward on the list until you get to Timo Werner, who finished with
Yeah.
46 points. You guys just didn't have any forwards
We
this year in
didn't. We really
FPL. They were all
didn't.
midfield.
Dane Scarlett was the only one really outside of Timo, which he came in at halfway line, and we just re-signed him on loan again. That's confirmed as of like 9 hours ago, so he'll be here. But we really didn't have a true forward. Now I imagine Richarlison gets reclassified as a forward if he's still at Tottenham next season.
I would
right?
think so.
Yeah. So there's that. But I'm buying Tottenham assets. You didn't have to ask me. I'm buying Tottenham assets to start the season just because of how strong we started last season. I think they're going to be really good, consistent players. You'll have to figure out who's who, right? Matters probably going to start. I like him. I don't know that he's going to get a crazy price rise or anything like that. He might even get a discount. Who knows? Sonny, obviously, same conversation we had with Salah. Does he stay at the 10 million mark? Does he drop down based on age and losing a step? Things like that, even though he is on penalties, as just like Salah. What I will say is I'm going to have Udogie. I think if he's healthy throughout the season, no red card suspensions, he's going to get goal contributions. He's going to get forward. We're going to do better keeping clean sheets next season. So I'm probably going to own at least 2 Spurs assets. I will tell you, we've got a rock star midfielder coming from Sweden that we signed in January, Lucas Bergvall, and he is a goal-scoring midfielder, one to look out for. We've done this with several players in the past, right? Papa Matasar signed him, left him at his club on loan, took him next season, rock star, right? We did it with Udogie last season. We left him in Italy, bought him in January, left him there for the next half of the season, came rock star. Bergvall is going to follow that same pattern. I think Mikey Moore is going to break through in the midfield. I think you're going to have a lot of value Tottenham assets to go for, especially later on in the season. But to start, I'm definitely going to be on Matters and on Udogie, as long as the fixtures aren't ridiculous.
I think Udogie is a really good shout. It sort of helps this conundrum I have with Tottenham, which is the same one that we had all season, which is outside of Son, who's the second best Spurs pick, right? Is it Porro? Is it Madison? Is it Brennan Johnson? Is it the goalkeeper, right? We just don't know. And I think by the end of this season, we still don't really know. But if we get everybody back healthy and we see a consistent 11 with Richarlison starting up front, I think there's a decent chance that it's Richarlison. And then depending on the price discrepancy between Porro and Udogie, I would expect Porro to be 5.5. And if that's the case, I think Udogie is going to be 5. And then you have to decide, is he worth it compared to the other 4 or 5 guys, given the attacking potential? And I think that's going to be a close call. But I certainly believe in Udogie's talent as a player as well. It's more about, I think, how do I fit the Spurs guys into my FPL team? Speaking of, do you want to give price predictions for Son? Let's say Richarlison becomes a forward and Porro next season.
I think Porro is going to be too expensive. That's why I didn't list him. He was, like I said, he was second, or he was the highest goal contributing defender in the Premier League. So I think he's going to be priced out. He might be at that 6.5, 7 range as well. That's probably where I see him going, especially if our defense improves, which most people assume it will. Richarlison, I think, is going to be at 6.5 again. And if he's reclassified as a forward, I think he's a great value third striker role. Sonny, I'm thinking is going to get a discount. He'll start at 9.5, somewhere around there. I think it's single digits. And like you said, Udogie's probably going to start at 5.
I like 9.5 for Son. I think Richarlison comes in at 7. as a forward. I think Udogi comes in at 5, Poro 5-5. Two more teams here to talk about. The first one, also based in London, is West Ham. They finished ninth on 52 points. They generated 48.4, non-penalty expected goals for. That was good for 15th in the league, while allowing 63.2 non-penalty expected goals against. That was good for 16th in the league, resulting in a negative 14.8 non-penalty expected goal differential, good also for 16th in the league. They finished in the table 9th. This is the other team outside of Manchester United that finished way above where their underlying numbers suggested. Now, I think part of this is that West Ham was one of the first teams in the league that was truly beached and therefore just got battered kind of during the last quarter of the season between game week 30 and game week 38, despite a strong start. They had sort of a lame duck manager in Moyes, so interpret that how you will, but they were the second worst team from a non-penalty expected goal differential last season. That's still in the Premier League. Their top players from last season from a point standpoint, number one was Jared Bowen with 182 points, finishing on 7.6 million. Ward-Prowse with 146 million. Oh, not 146 million. That would be pretty good. 146 points overall. Mohamed Kudus with 137 and Areola with 116. No real forwards here to mention. Antonio finished with 78. Are you buying or selling West Ham next season with Lopetegui in charge?
Selling to start, especially because you just got to see how this plays out. Who stays, who goes, who's the guy. Bowen's probably always going to be at least a consistent pick, but I think he's going to be too pricey in next year's kind of model that I'm going to want to spend that money elsewhere. So that's where I'm at. I'm selling. I'm not high on a lot of the West Ham assets. I tried to go Ward-Prowse early on last season, and he didn't return really, except for one game. He had 3 assists. Great. The next 7, he didn't return at all. So I'm probably not going to go there again just because I've been burned. But what do you think about the goalkeeper situation there? Do you think we're going to have goalkeepers again?
I think Areola is really the only guy that I could see myself starting with game week 1 for West Ham. It depends. Kudus is 6'7". I think he'll come out at 6'5", and if the Palace guys are 7 million, like we think, I don't see anybody going Kudus. Same thing for Bowen. If Bowen is 7.5 next season and Palace guys are 7, everybody's going Palace guys. It's not really even a discussion. So they might have some very weird mid-price midfielders that didn't have bad FPL seasons by any stretch last season, especially Bowen. 182 points is very good, and I think a lot of people owned him at various points in the season, but he's just going to be difficult to fit in to the team. Lopetegui, we know, is a more defensive-minded manager, and without really any defensive standouts for West Ham, you say maybe Kufal, maybe Emerson, but I think Areola is probably the best pick of that group, especially if he comes in at 4.5 next season. I think that could be a good place to start.
Yeah. I don't have much else to say about West Ham, force of habit.
Agreed. Let's move on to our last team, Wolves. Finished 14th on 46 points. They accumulated 43.6 non-penalty expected goals this season. That was good for 17th, which in this list of teams is last. They also allowed 61.4 non-penalty expected goals against. That was good for 15th, finishing with a negative 17.8 non-penalty expected goal differential, which again is last of the teams that remain in the Premier League. Top scoring players this season, Matheus Cunha with 135 points, Hwang with 125 points, classified as a midfielder. I would imagine that he'll be reclassified to forward next season.
Yeah.
And lastly, Jose Sa with 107 points. Special shout out to Sarabia, 4.5, finished with 99 points. He was in a lot of teams at one point. Are you buying or selling the Gary O'Neill Wolves project next season?
Yeah, I'm fine still. I think he got really unlucky with injuries and with VAR decisions, right? I don't know if you've seen, you're not drinking the corruption ref Kool-Aid like I do sometimes, but I don't know if you've seen the VAR numbers, but like Tottenham were like -2 or something in the overall net of decisions for and against him. Wolves were like -14. I mean, it was like insane how much of a discrepancy there was between them and the team that was next most screwed over by VAR. So I think there's merit there to say that they were pretty unlucky with a lot of those decisions because I think a lot of them were wrong. But um, outside of that, I like what the energy that O'Neill brought to Wolves. They were also a ton of fun to own at one point when everybody was healthy. Nori, Sarabia, King Cunha, Huang, right? I think a lot of people went to Wolves assets at the wrong time, and that's what kind of got them. But to me, Nori, I think, is going to be a great asset to have as long as he stays as a defender, right? But watching them play together was a lot like watching the Palace players play together. It was tricky. It was 1-2 touch, slipping someone in behind. A lot of fun. So I'm in on Wolves assets for sure. It'll just be a matter of who's there and what the price points are.
Yeah, I'd agree. When everyone was healthy, it did seem like there was kind of a period in this season where this team was clicking. And
Yeah.
I think of the non-penalty statistics that I've been going through, this was the most surprising, I think, to see them towards the bottom. So, I think as FPL managers, we'll have to think through, like you said, just how much did injuries impact this team last season, and how much do we buy into, positive regression for a team that overperformed based on its not penalty expected goals. But you mentioned a lot of players. Another guy that I'll mention is Pedro Neto, who was kind of the talisman for this team. Again, somebody that
the entire season, right?
2 years ago,
like,
was sort of the darling FPL pick. Didn't really do anything, and then this season it felt like emerged as sort of the guy for Wolves. Had a ton of assists, and then eventually, unfortunately, got injured. So, if he's back, Cunha's back, Sarabi is back, Huang is back. I think offensively, they do have some good options that I expect to be under 7 million. Do you want to predict Mateus Cunha's price and Nori's price for next season?
I think Nori is going to be like a 5.5. He's going to be in that range. I don't think he's quite a 6 like some others. I think it'll be similar to Udogie, but one I want to own for sure. But Cunha, I have no idea because I feel like he was injured a lot as well towards the end of the season. So I'm just not, I don't know. Gun to my head, 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Cunha, I would say, might be a 6 million striker.
You think 6? Okay.
We'll see if he's on penalties with Huang back, because Huang was taking him and then Huang was out and then Cunha was taking him. So I think that could be an interesting play if we get some clarity there. I also see Nori is 5 million defender. I think he just missed too much time this season to get up into the 5.5 range. Like, I think he's more on the Udogie level than the Pedro Porro level for me.
I think that's fair. So that was our last team. Are you going to give us any honorable mentions from the promoted teams coming in next season? We got the Ipswich guy. I don't know if you've seen any other info from the teams coming up, but obviously Leicester's back, right? Southampton's back.
Why don't we save that and we'll do kind of as we get into, instead of postseason review, get into preview. I think that we should definitely
review to preview. Yeah.
Some preview on the promoted guys. Jamie Vardy is back.
Legend.
Is he the best striker of the 3 promoted teams? You mentioned Leif Davis from Ipswich, 18 assists last season. It looks like McKenna is going to stay with the Tractor Boys. How does that
Ed Sheeran's Tractor Boys?
How does that style, translate from League One to the Championship to the Premier League? It'd be really interesting to see. I was going to say that's all we have for our team by team postseason reviews. We might have 1 or 2 more kind of postseason-ish episodes coming up, but then I think we'll start to look forward to the summer transfer window as well as previewing next season's version of FPL. So as always, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.